everyone. Welcome to Education for Flourishing, Pursuing Purpose in the Professions. This webinar is part of Virtues and Vocations, a national forum housed at the Center for Social Concerns at the University of Notre Dame, for scholars and practitioners across disciplines to consider how best to cultivate character in pre-professional and professional education. This initiative is funded through a generous grant from the Kern Family Foundation. I am Suzanne Shanahan, and I direct the Center for Social Concerns. I am also host for this series. At any point in the program, you can submit questions through the Q&A function in Zoom, and we will return to those audience questions at around 12:40. Be assured there is a backstage team that will address any technical difficulties that will arise. And with that, I am thrilled to bits to welcome sociology professor and chair at the Catholic University of America, Brandon Vaidyanathan, to discuss beauty at work. Brandon holds a bachelor's and master's degrees in business administration from St. Xavier University in Nova Scotia and HEC Montreal, respectively. He has a PhD in sociology from Notre Dame. His research examines the role of culture in religious, economic, scientific institutions around the world, drawing on a wide range of methodologies, surveys, interviews, ethnography, experiments, and archival research. He examines how cultural and institutional factors shape mental health and well-being. He's currently working on projects that examine the mental health impact of COVID-19 pandemic on religious and scientific organizations, a national study of Catholic priests in the US, and an international study on the role of aesthetics in science. He's also the author of 2 books, both out in 2019. The first, Secularity and Science, What Scientists Around the World Really Think About Religion. And then a second book, Mercenaries and Missionaries. He is also founder of Beauty at Work, a project which includes a blog, YouTube videos, and podcast exploring how beauty can both foster and inhibit our flourishing in a variety of domains, such as science, food, business, religion, justice, and more. Welcome, Brandon. Thrilled to have you here.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
So as we discussed, we're going to have a fairly open-ended conversation, and I want to jump right in to talk a little bit about this project, Beauty at Work. You've, in your short career, already done a range of projects on different topics. How did you come to this project, Beauty at Work? What was the driving inspiration for that?
Yeah, thanks. There are a lot of factors I think that shaped it. One of the main threads was actually started at Notre Dame when I was about maybe 15 years ago or something, doing a sort of a doctoral course on social movements, and we were studying protest movements. And there was a lot of literature on the role of emotion in protest movements, and particularly what they call moral shocks. So these ways in which moral outrage really drives a lot of activism. And it struck me in looking through some of that work that's only one-sided. There certainly is outrage at the absence of something, but it's that something, that ideal, that good, that draws people in the first place to bemoan its absence. And I was curious to think about what could that be, and I stumbled upon some of the work of Elaine Scarry, a philosopher of aesthetics at Harvard, who wrote this book on beauty and justice, and I found that a really fascinating account. I'd never thought about beauty as something that could be relevant to justice, and it seemed to me that some of what she was saying was really novel. I mean, the relationship between our experience of symmetry in the world and our desire then to bring about equality. I don't really agree with a lot of her claims. I think they're a little too essentialist. I don't think it works like that all the time. The Nazis loved beauty and they did all kinds of horrible things, but there was something there that I thought was really compelling, and what it needed was some empirical work. And then a few years later, I was doing a big study of scientists. This was led by my mentor at Rice University, Elaine Howard Eklund, and that's where that book, Secularity and Science, came about. It was a jointly authored book that came out of our research on scientists in 8 countries, looking at the role of religion and spirituality and even family and so on in science. And we were talking to these scientists who we surveyed, thousands and thousands of scientists and interviewed more than 600 of them. And then at the end of the interviews, we had this question. We'd ask them, especially after they've talked about their lives and the sacrifices they made, the hardships and difficulties they endured. Many of them had to, sacrifice their health and sometimes their families. We'd ask them, well, why do you do this? Like, what makes it worthwhile? And I started to hear a number of them tell me, because it's beautiful. And that was not something I expected at all. We were talking to physicists and biologists, so these are mostly academics and bench scientists. They're not in industry. They're not curing cancer. They're not, building spaceships necessarily. A lot of them are doing something that is very similar to art in their opinion. And so I wanted to understand what does beauty mean to scientists. And it seemed to me that scientists were much more prone to talk about beauty than folks I knew in the arts, than artists or architects, where it's sort of the term beauty has become kind of passé. There's a lot of interest in that concept in science, and some live debates in the field of theoretical physics, where people argue that mathematical beauty either is a reliable guide to the truth or is really misleading and bad for science. And so I found that super interesting as a sociologist, just trying to understand what's going on in the field of science. And so that got me interested in studying beauty and science. For the last 5 years, we've been doing a major, really the world's first empirical study measuring what beauty means to scientists, what role it plays in the practice of science and the well-being of scientists and so on. And as I've been doing that study, I've wanted to explore, well, how does what they're talking about, how does their experience of beauty relate to what other people experience in other domains of work? It's just not something that we think about. We don't think about beauty in relation to work typically. And I just was, curious and started having random conversations with cocktail bar owners and chefs and athletes and so on, and started to find some interesting principles that are both similar across all these domains that resonate both in science as well as in these other fields of work, but then also some unique aspects of beauty in different fields. And I'm really on this sort of path of trying to explore what this means to people and how it shapes our lives.
So one of the things I love about the project is the exploration of beauty in everyday life, in some sense. And so you mentioned the beauty in cocktails, which was a segment I really loved as a fan of cocktails and someone who thinks they can make a beautiful cocktail. But also then thinking about the contrast between a beautiful cocktail and, say, the beauty in Arab culture. And as you look at the different objects of inquiry and beauty in different domains, so my first question is, right, do you bring the concept of beauty to people, or is that already a part of their language and logic that they're using? And then the second one is, what are elements that you see really consistently across domains, and what ones seem to be unique? If you just take, say, those two examples, Arab culture and cocktails.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that's yeah, those are really, yeah, it seems on the outset very different, right? So I don't really impose any definition of beauty, and people typically ask me if you're studying beauty, what do you mean by beauty? It's very inductive at this stage. I really want to know whatever it means to people. And maybe for some people the word doesn't mean anything, but for everyone I've encountered, they're usually there's something that they associate with that word. And so yeah, with the cocktail bar owner that I spoke to, she had 3 aesthetic principles. One was balance or harmony, and that seems to be really a universal principle, a universal aesthetic principle. It has something to do with the relationship between parts and wholes, and the ratios of things. There are various ways in which that can be articulated. And so she was talking about a balance of flavors. I've talked to chefs who similarly talk about that being really crucial. What are the specifics of balance or harmony that would look different in different places? Certainly, sometimes it doesn't mean equality, right? It doesn't necessarily mean the classic Negroni, where you have equal parts of whatever gin, Campari, and vermouth, or whatever. You can play around, and there's something, so then what's the basis for how you adjust those levels? And the second ingredient there is perhaps the story that you want to tell. So maybe there is something you want to communicate that's beyond just the sort of taste by itself. And that's why I think beauty has a lot to do with meaning and meaningfulness, because we are tying in story and interpretation to our judgments of beauty quite often. And the other aspect that she had mentioned was that so you have the sense of balance, you have a compelling story. I'm blanking now. There's one more key ingredient in her account, which was there's another aesthetic principle there. Gosh, I can't remember now. It'll probably come to me in a little bit. But in talking about Arab culture, though, we were talking about a different kind of aesthetic experience, right? So it's obviously it's not about taste, but there are still judgments about what is admirable, what is excellent, and there's something there that the person I was interviewing was a poet and a professor of literature, and he was talking really about certain aesthetic principles that govern Islamic culture that are not found in a lot of common stereotypes of, say, purity culture. It's not really about purity, but it's really about the value of beauty in and of itself, right? And you can see it in a lot of Islamic artwork. You can see it in a lot of even in the architecture of mosques and so on, but certainly in poetry, one of the ways in which you can realize something is beautiful is if it somehow conveys a truth about human experience, right? And that is that's a feature of a lot of excellent art, is that it conveys truth. That there's another poet I interviewed who in characterizing what counts as a beautiful poem said it's when you read something and you go, that's how things are. So it reveals something that is a sort of more true representation of reality than perhaps your own concept of that thing, right? So it makes clarifies for you when you read that, this is my experience, and here's someone who's articulated my experience better than I could. And that is really an experience of beauty in someone who's able to name that truth of yours, right? So, so that kind of reflection of truth is an interesting aesthetic principle, which I suppose if you have a good story, the cocktail bar owner I was talking to was trying to convey, for instance, in one of her cocktails, a story about the Berry Hill massacre in Haiti, and she was trying to blend these ingredients from Haitian and Dominican liqueurs and tastes and so forth, as well as parsley, which was what the massacre was around, the pronunciation of the word parsley. And so to be able to tell that story and somehow through this drink reveal something true about human experience and the tragedy that people have encountered, but to sort of do this through art. So that's I think one of the key aesthetic principles there is that ability to to grasp this is how things are, and our scientists talk about that as well. I mean, that is, we could talk about sensory beauty in science, like symmetry and the pretty colors and shapes and so on you can encounter either in the stars or under the microscope, but there's also a kind of beauty that that you experience when you have an insight into how reality works, into what's behind the veil of appearances and the patterns that you're seeing, what makes things the way they are. And when you grasp that, it's a profoundly beautiful, it's a moment. This is really what most scientists think that the beauty is about. It's the grasping of that inner logic of things and the hidden order of things. And that seems to be identical for the poet, and it's for the cocktail bar owner as well as the scientist. There's something about conveying this is how things are.
So you've clearly moved beauty outside of a kind of narrow aesthetic domain. And I was thinking about your work over the weekend. I was in Las Vegas for work. And I had this extraordinary view outside my hotel window where there's that fake Eiffel Tower. And it's a discongruous sight, because then it's, you see a sign for a hamburger shop, and it's kind of gross in certain ways. And yet the mountains are behind it. And it creates this sort of truth or this understanding that I thought, like, wow, that's extraordinary beauty in that moment. And it wasn't just like the figure of the Eiffel Tower and its exactness in the replication, or the mountains. It was somehow the truth of the two coming together that told a story about something that was much more compelling. And so could you talk a little bit about sort of this notion of truth? And is the beauty something that the cocktail owner, the Arab culture, the scientist, is that their language of beauty? Or is that your language that you're summarizing these elements with? When you talk to folks, do they describe their work in terms of beauty? And do you see the unity across these depictions of beauty?
Yeah, so I do typically ask them, what they would associate with beauty in their work, or where do they encounter beauty in their work. And I just leave, I often use that word. I've rarely, a strategy I might use if people say I don't know what that word means, I might say, well, what do you find excellent or admirable, right? Because I think the ancient Greek word kalon is this, it has the same connotation. The beautiful is the admirable. And that's another sort of clue into where people find, something beautiful. But I've not had to do that. And people typically have something in mind when they're thinking of beauty. The connections across domains is something that I'm trying to do. Is I'm trying to sort of unpack, as people are describing what it is they find beautiful, what are the sort of principles underlying their judgments, right? What in their account makes a particular experience beautiful? What leads them to judge that as beautiful? Because there is a second order process. It's not just sort of a sensory experience, but there's also that ability to to sort of reflect on it and say, yeah, that was beautiful, and then we can sort of interrogate that and say, well, what makes it beautiful? What are the sort of components? And so that's, truth is an interesting aspect of this conversation, because scientists, we would think, are in the business of finding truth, but a lot of scientists, when we talk to them, don't think that science is fundamentally about truth. And I think there's a bit of skepticism or pessimism that's come into science over the last several decades. Most scientists think they're in the business of understanding, and of what we're trying to do is to understand the world. We don't know if our understanding is true. We certainly don't think that any so-called truth that we discover is going to exhaust reality. There'll always be some new theory that, some new discovery that in a few decades or a few hundred years will turn everything we know on its head. And so there's a sense in which beauty is important for understanding. And there's also, I think, the need to be careful there, because you could be misled by beauty if you just cling to it. So if you just cling to what you find beautiful, particularly once you're an expert in something, I think there's a danger for us to equate our judgments of beauty with truth. It's hard for that not to happen, because over time, our tastes become somewhat reliable in sort of helping us navigate the world. They're good heuristics, right? So if you're an accomplished scientist, and you see this in a lot of these Nobel Prize winners, they talk about beauty. They talk as though they've developed a really good sense for when a theory is going to be true. Even if you have no experimental evidence yet, you can make a judgment. But I think this theory is going to be true because it's beautiful, because the mathematics are beautiful, or whatever. And I think we do that in a lot of fields. And there is a challenge there that you have to be open to reality, and I think beauty needs to be tethered to truth. Otherwise, it can be misleading. And there is a good argument for why in the sciences it has been misleading, where people have pursued or stuck doggedly to beautiful theories and they turned out not to be true, or there's a concern that the investments that the pursuit of those theories demands financially really isn't bearing any fruit after decades of inquiry. And maybe there should be some other guiding principle than beautiful mathematics, to shape our investments. So truth is, I think, an important consideration, but how do we get at that? I think we just have to be careful about the propensity of beauty to bias us cognitively, and we're never going to do away with it completely. I think our aesthetic judgments are going to be shortcuts for us, whether in choosing someone to date, or like you make it's choosing someone to hire. There's a lot of data on how physical beauty is misleading in terms of hiring judgments and so on. So it in many ways, I think, shapes our lives for good or ill.
So you've described beauty as somewhat neglected and have also connected it to thriving and human flourishing. So how do you make that connection to flourishing more generally?
Yeah, I'm trying to talk about beauty in the domain of work, and so not beauty necessarily in art or fashion or physical features and so on, right? Which is what we usually think about when we think about beauty. Um, there is a lot of research in neuroscience about aesthetic experience and what it does to us and why we find things pleasing and how those sorts of experiences are linked to physiologically to our sense of well-being. So whether it's seeing I don't know, listening to certain kinds of sounds is more soothing, or whether it's seeing a sunset, it has a physiological experience, and this is something that we have been sort of hardwired, right, to do, is to appreciate these sorts of experiences over um, millions of years. But there's also the kind of thing I'm interested in is how beauty, aesthetic experience is linked to a sense of meaning and purpose, right? So if you're a scientist and you experience in your work not just pretty colors and shapes, but that deep sense of understanding that this is how reality works, and then you see that the work you've put in actually is fruitful because it allows you to have a better knowledge into how reality works, even if objectively, maybe your theory is wrong, maybe someone's going to disprove it, but at that point in time, you really have improved understanding. Those things are linked to subjective well-being, our sense of purpose, sense of meaningfulness, also a sense of community. So when you, particularly as a scientist, you encounter something beautiful in the lab, something, you see a process unfolding on the microscope, or you discover, I don't know, supernova for the first time, you can't not run and share it with others. Like you really, it's really a great joy. It's one of the greatest joys of working in that community, that you discover things together and you share your discoveries and then you celebrate those discoveries. And so it really is an important part of linking us to others. And in other ways, like we even share aesthetic experiences together, whether it's watching a movie or sharing a meal and cooking together. I mean, those are things that certainly are, making art or other forms of beauty is important for our social relationships. So it helps our social well-being as well. And also, beauty can be really transformative in our experiences of sadness. And so there's some great work by Susan Cain in her new book, Bittersweet, which I highly recommend. And she talks about how art, especially, and music in particular, can really transform our experiences of sadness in this way that someone is representing to us our experience, and in that moment of encounter with, say, a sad song, um, something by Leonard Cohen, or like it has to be well done, right? So you can encounter in that work of art something that resonates with your own experience. You're not alone, but it also taps into your deepest longings, right? And I think that is one of the arguments she makes, is that sadness is linked to our sense of longing, our connection for the infinite, our desire for the infinite. So those are ways in which I'm trying to link beauty with well-being, is those dimensions.
Um, one of the things I thought was interesting is that even in this description, you're linking, say, beauty to joy, beauty to story. Um, is there a difference between beauty and joy analytically in that sense?
Yeah, I'm trying to look at beauty as something objective outside of us. So it is, either in the proportions of colors or shapes or tastes that we're encountering, or the coming together of some ideas in our mind. So in the sense that it is distant from us, and joy, I think, is our response to it. It can be, right? And I think joy is I think is some kind of recognition of correspondence, that this thing that I'm encountering is somehow good. It's somehow what I'm made for. It's somehow what I belong to. And yeah, so I can see the beauty in you know, my toddler's face as she's painting something, and then I have that moment of joy where I experience a sense of gratitude that I belong to this person, and this moment is given to me. So I think I think they're a little bit distinct. Of course, they're happening at the same time.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, and I don't know if all experiences of beauty are linked to joy necessarily, because there could be beauty in sadness and suffering, and um, you know, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. But in your mind, it's connected to some emotive state, or it produces an emotive state, so they are somehow linked.
Yeah, I think they're, yeah, beauty produces it. It's not, and some people consider beauty an emotion. I don't. I think it's some sort of it's a stimulus that then produces our response. So whether it's joy or awe, and awe could have fear mixed in with it. Wonder, which is a different emotion from joy, certainly, right? Because we're really then striving to understand how can this be, and you know, uh what makes this happen. And so sort of it energizes us in a certain way, or could be an emotion where it's more contemplative, where we're just sort of basking in the presence of something.
Mhm.
So I think there are a lot of different emotional states that it can evoke.
And so some of those you described, so joy, wonder, awe, are those things folks have described to you as sort of the response to beauty? Um, and do those sorts of things vary by the domain you're looking at, in terms of scientists are more likely to experience a sense of joy or a sense of wonder, um, right? Folks working in literature, one or the other. Is there any correspondence there, or is this a general set of experiences that are associated with beauty?
That's a great question. I don't think I have enough data to differentiate scientists from others. I do think there are, I mean, you know, there are some domain specific experiences. I mean, I think that the kind of wonder that drives people to do more research, you know, that raises more questions, I think is different from the response one might have to a cocktail. Um, but there is also a, you know, an element of surprise that seems very, very important in science for that experience of uh, you know, something being considered profoundly beautiful, that there's an unexpected aspect to it. Um, you know, whether even if somebody who's uh, you've got a hypothesis, and then you run an experiment, and it turns out your hypothesis was correct, there's still something surprising in that experience, that wow, I thought it would, you know, I did hypothesize I would find this, but now to actually see it, it's just really, there is something surprising about it. And there's something just as surprising when you don't see what you expected. And sometimes there can be even a sense of, you know, Daniel Kahneman, the Nobel Prize winning economist, calls it the joy of having been wrong. There is a way in which you can even experience a sense of delight when you realize you're wrong, because you can learn something new. That seems, I don't want to say unique necessarily to science, but it seems, you know, we're certainly finding it among a number of scientists, and it's something that the world, I think, desperately needs. We don't really see that in our sort of polarized, you know, politically polarized world, where people don't want to be wrong. They don't, there's no openness to changing one's mind. Whereas in science, when it works well, there is almost a desire to be proven wrong. There's that desire to you know, to learn something new, and there's a sense of delight that can come out of you know, surprising experience of um, things not turning out the way you thought they would. So that might be a bit unique in ways that, you know, maybe as a baker, you know, you don't want to be surprised by your cookies not turning out the way you thought. So yeah, there could be differences on that level.
So are there things, it's interesting, if I think in a typical day, the kind of language and logic of beauty doesn't seem to cross my radar all that much. Are there ways that we can be more open and receptive and engaged with this concept of beauty?
Yeah, I think that would be a good thing. Trying to become more attuned to the things that we admire, the things that we're drawn to, the things that move us, um, the the things that we're trying to imitate. Because those are usually, you know, things that there is a sort of, I think, a hidden judgment of beauty in our imitation of people. And My friend Luke Burgess has a really powerful book on mimesis called Wanting, and it's a great synthesis of the work of Rene Girard, and I think the models that the people that we imitate unconsciously, that we find admirable for something or other, that seem to us as exemplars of whether again they may not be healthy, they may be sort of Instagram whatever influencers or something like that, but where I think we can't but be led by beauty. I think it's shaping us all the time, and there are things that are drawing us all the time to act in certain ways, to desire certain things, and I think it's important for us to interrogate what do we desire and why, what are we drawn to and why, but also to exercise gratitude, which is something I struggle with. I'm a bit of a pessimist, so this project is kind of peculiar for me to pursue, because those who know me well would be surprised to see that. I think that for me that's a big thing, which I really need to cultivate gratitude. And so paying attention to what I find beautiful and why is an important exercise that I think is worthwhile for all of us.
So if we play a little on your pessimism, is there a dark side to beauty?
Yeah, I think there are a number of dark sides to beauty. I think it'd be misleading in a number of ways. As I mentioned, for the scientists, one of the ways in which they talk about beauty being misleading is when you're so convinced a theory is true because it's beautiful, or because the mathematics is beautiful, that you don't really, you're not really governed by, well, experiment has to be the deciding factor. That could be really problematic. It can lead to a lot of wasted time and money. There's also another concern that came up when, in relation to beauty and vocation. So, a number of scientists, we'd asked them in our survey, more than 3,000 scientists that we surveyed, said, but more than 70% of them said that they see their work as a calling and a vocation. It's one of the most meaningful aspects of their lives. And for again, and this experience of beauty in science is very highly correlated with that sense of meaningfulness, and it's because of having those insights and being able to encounter beauty in their work regularly, that's one of the things that makes their work meaningful. But the dark side to it is some scientists have told us, particularly junior scientists and women have told us, this is kind of being used to sort of manipulate us and to tell us, hey, why are you asking for better pay or for maternity leave and so on? You get to do what you love, you get to do what's beautiful, you get to do what you're passionate about. It's a privilege, that someone even pays you to do something like this. So stop complaining and just do your work, right? So there's a sense in which one of the scientists we talked to told us, those who style their work as a vocation are essentially being told that you're not worthy of respect, you don't deserve equal pay, or those sorts of things. And the expectation also is with time, a lot of scientists are expected to be in the lab for long hours and make a lot of sacrifices. And it's also this idea that this is a privilege and this is a vocation or a calling, and if you don't do this, you're not serious, you're not really doing this for love. And so that kind of manipulation, I think, is something we got to be careful about. But beauty can also mislead us. I just interviewed a chef a couple of weeks ago, who was talking about how they're a group of people who work in a religious community, and they are very well trained, and they wanted to make a birthday cake for someone in the community whose birthday it was. And they're trained in sort of French pastry, and they can make the most sophisticated kinds of things. And this person in the community just wanted an ice cream cake. They're like, really, ice cream cake? Oh, that's so then it took them a little while to overcome their aversion and say, you know what, but that's what he wants, and that's what's going to be really special for him. So they had to sort of overcome their kind of elitism, and the sort of put aside their expertise and say, well, here's something that this is oriented towards a certain purpose. It's not just intrinsically the beauty of this cake, and you're not here to compete in some pastry making competition, but we're here to be in service to this person. And so that had to come first, and it took some reorienting. So there are ways in which beauty could be misleading in those ways, and of course tons of ways in which beauty can be horribly exploitative in terms of whether it's women's body standards and aesthetic standards and colonialism, and how that's colonial tastes have been imposed on other cultures and so forth. So there's a whole bunch of stuff over there that I'm not looking into, but there's a ton of work done on that topic.
Great. You mentioned sort of the culture of sort of polarization a little bit. And you recently had a conversation with Yuval Levin about this. And I wonder, I realize it's a bit of a detour, but you brought it up. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about your thinking there.
Yeah, I mean, I think it really is the question of what is it going to take for us to see each other as human beings, but then also to be able to overcome, our sort of the cocoons we're in, right? I mean, we're really I have created these. I think my sense of it is that our identities have become really fragile, and we need to surround ourselves with people and voices that are like-minded, because we have no capacity for the other. We really just can't entertain someone who's very different. So I think, and there's also research showing, there's really great research by Chris Bale that shows that even if you subject people or expose people to ideas from outside their echo chamber, it doesn't change their minds. It actually leads them to redouble, particularly those on the right tend to sort of reaffirm their positions, become more extremist when they hear positions from the left. So so this is a really challenging problem. I don't quite have a sense of how to solve it, but in terms of if you were to ask what are the design criteria for what a good solution would look like, I think one of them would be the ability to change one's mind, and again, in service of not just for its own sake, but in service of some deeper truth. And I think trying to understand, what do people find beautiful? What are people drawn to? What do they admire? What do they find excellent? I think somewhere in trying to pursue those questions, we can build bridges, or we can realize our common humanity and realize that, maybe we're striving for similar principles in different ways, and we can disagree about, the pathways to get there. But to rehumanize the other, I think is really critical. And maybe, I don't know. I mean, this is a very naive thing, right? Dostoevsky's sort of Prince Mishkin quote, "The beauty will save the world." I don't know what role it can play in our polarized times, but perhaps it could lead us to better appreciate those who are very different from us, and to see that maybe in their aesthetic judgments, maybe there's something similar we share in I don't know, whether it's something as banal as the cocktails they find beautiful, or the stories that have rendered a particular meal beautiful to them, or even a poem, or what have you, right? I think I don't know. That's sort of, I think, one of the motivations for my project too, is to tell these stories that could allow people to discover each other in a new light.
Great. So some of the questions are queuing up, so I'm going to turn to a couple now.
Sure.
The first one, there are some physical and mechanical science programs in East Asia that require applicants to take undergraduate art classes. Given what your work has revealed so far, do you think this is a promising idea?
Yeah, I think it's I think that's actually a really good idea to I was actually listening this morning to a lecture from India by a physicist turned sculptor, and he was talking about the relationship between art and science, and it seems to me that it really helps to have it helps to have an artistic background in certain scientific fields. In medicine in particular, it's really helpful for things like anatomy, but you could see certainly, and it's mutual. I mean, I think artists should also study science. I think that it can really be helpful for them to understand physical principles of how the world works, etc. To make certain kinds of art. It's really crucial. But yeah, I think it could be really valuable for a deeper understanding of how things work. There's a Nobel Prize winning physicist, Frank Wilczek, who says that nature embodies beautiful ideas, and science essentially is, in his view, getting a sort of an insight into the mind of the artist. That he's not necessarily a theist, but he uses this sort of metaphorically, that there is a kind of deep artwork that science is in the business of revealing. So in that sense, I think certainly an artistic found, and it could be music. I don't know if it necessarily has to be like painting, but it could, there's certainly a lot of benefit to the mathematical beauty of music can be very helpful to a physicist, for instance.
Great. What what do you take to be the relationship between truth and beauty? Is one a good guide to the other, or are they more disconnected?
Yeah, I think I put a Venn diagram and say that there is I don't know what it would look like necessarily. I'm torn on this question as to whether is all truth beautiful. I think there are ways in which we may not be ready for some truths, and I think there's I think even Jesus says so in Scripture that you cannot handle all of the truth, and so there may be truth that we will not find beautiful currently, and it would require work. But there's also things that we find beautiful that are not true, that are somehow just a product of maybe our own disordered desires or our woundedness, and there are people who might be drawn to, say, I don't know, a lot of power and even find pleasure in torturing people and so on. There are things that people find pleasurable. I don't know if they use the word beauty, but beauty could be again, I think it depends on what whether beauty leads you to admire it versus wanting so leading you to want to possess it. I think there are different things. So it depends on like what you do with it, I suppose, right? So you can be led to murder your neighbor as David did to Uriah and so on, and so there are ways in which it can be really destructive. So I think beauty does need to be tethered to truth, but I don't think it always is. And I think that when we're exploring beauty, I think the question of truth and even goodness, is all beauty good? I recall transcripts of scientists during the just before the atomic bomb. There's some of their language where they make aesthetic judgments about how sweet this technology was that ended up being so destructive, and so there are judgments of beauty being made that are untethered from goodness, and that so that's an issue as well. So I think we have to keep those things in mind.
Great. At one point, you mentioned that you're investigating beauty as something objective, but you also said that you depend on your subjects' personal judgments about what's beautiful instead of giving them a more detailed guidance about what beauty is. Is this a significant methodological challenge?
Well, I mean it as objective simply in the sense that it's something, it's not just an emotion we have, right? So I think the judgment of beauty is certainly a subjective judgment. It's something that I can make myself, and no one else makes my judgment of beauty for me, right? But I'm interested in objective properties like symmetry, simplicity, complexity. So those are things that perhaps they have a degree of interpretation associated with them, but symmetry means something very specific in physics, and so you could say we're talking about an objective thing. But I don't want to, I suppose, tell. I'm not going in with a particular definition of beauty and asking them necessarily to, either confirm or refute that definition. I genuinely want to know like what it is they find beautiful, and usually I'm seeing a relationship between a stimulus or a phenomenon, or principle or criterion, and then a response, right? So balance or harmony is a criterion for making a good meal, and then what that looks like subjectively, can vary, but that principle is, I think, objective, if that makes sense.
And so, just a related question. So, for you in your daily life, do you think this research has changed how you think about beauty? Do you walk around thinking about it differently in your day-to-day life, where you see it, how you interpret it, the meaning you ascribe to it?
Yeah, I think so. I'm more attentive to some of these things that, particularly when I've interviewed somebody or talked to someone, and I'm then, it's the things they're seeing are things that shape the way I see things, and I start to then interrogate whether, this or that criterion is present, and like, or at least when I experience something as beautiful, I start to have a better way to get at, okay, what is it about this experience that I seem to be enjoying so much, and why does it matter? And I feel I am informed by those things that people have told me. But I don't think there's an infinite set of aesthetic criteria either. Like I find it's often something around the same things, that there's harmony, and there's simplicity and elegance and complexity, and something to do with proportion, something to do with the clarity with which the essence of something is communicated. So it seems like there are a dozen or so principles that keep recurring. And some of them may be concentrated more in some domains than others. Some of them may not be relevant for some domains, but are relevant in others. But I haven't come across a kind of idiosyncratic beauty is in the eye of the beholder sort of thing. It seems like when people are talking about beauty, there's, a sort of a limited set of things that they're talking about, and I'm encountering those in my own world. I think I'm a little bit more attentive. I don't know if I want to say a lot more, but a little bit more than I used to be.
Great. As your students think about what jobs they pursue after graduating, do you think they should consider beauty as part of their discernment, or is it not necessarily a reliable guide to a career choice?
Yeah, well, it's a really good, it's a good question. Well, so here's one of the ways in which it might matter. We have a lot of data from scientists, especially on the workplaces in which they spend most of their waking hours, and many of them work in dark, dingy basements with no sunlight and no natural no access to green space and air and so on. Those are miserable environments, and it really does affect their well-being. So where you work does matter, and no matter how meaningful that work is, you will suffer if you don't have certain basics, if it's sort of a dehumanizing environment, right? So those sorts of aesthetics, and as one might think that's kind of superficial, your work environment, why should that matter? It does really affect us, and we are human beings, and we are creatures, and we are susceptible to all those things. We need light, and we need, gosh, I mean, I used to study call center workers in India who used to sleep through the day and work through the night. I mean, that affects you, so like there's certain basics that we need as human beings. Nutrition, exercise, all those sorts of things. If you don't have access to that, then you're working, 20-hour jobs, that's going to be a big problem. So I think, yeah, those are important for not just well-being, but they're related to beauty. Relational dynamics are also important. How people treat you. Are there other people you can admire? Are there people who are good? Are there people who are virtuous in your work environment? I think that, because there is a beauty, a moral beauty to people who are virtuous. And if you can't find that, and if you find something that's somewhat contrary to that in your work environment, you should probably run. I don't know if that's, because we are going to be contaminated. I mean, like, not only was contaminated, but I mean, like, that's going to shape you. And I mean, one of my books in Mercenaries and Missionaries was about people who enter the corporate world thinking, oh, I'm a person of good character, I'll be fine. And no, you won't. You will be completely, you will become like the people you surround yourselves with. So yeah, beauty, I think moral beauty in that sense is important in thinking about the work you do, but also think about what gives you joy, what's meaningful, whether the task itself is something that brings you intrinsic pleasure. I think that's the other aspect of beauty. Do you find, that sense of insight that I'm learning something new about the world, pieces of a puzzle are fitting together, I'm telling good stories, whatever that may be. Those are also, I think, aesthetic experiences that are important to have.
You talked a bit about how a sense of vocation can be used in a dark way as a coercive justification for unfair labor practices. Do you think that there are healthier ways that a sense of vocation can be incorporated into the workplace?
I think so. Yeah. I've been recently doing a national study of Catholic priests, and the idea of vocation does come up quite a lot as one of the main motivators for why priests remain committed to their work in the face of a lot of difficulties in the church these days, especially. So seeing oneself as having a certain identity, I am this kind of person, I am committed to this, I think is really important. It's part of, the story we tell ourselves, the narrative we tell ourselves about who we are and what we do. And I think having a clear narrative of that sort, it can be really helpful. It's hard in certain kinds of jobs to find that sense of calling or vocation. The work of Amy Rizhnowsky is a professor. She's a professor at Yale. She talks about the orientations to work as either a career or calling or just a job. And there are people who across all kinds of fields, even janitors, can find a sense of vocation in their work. So it isn't just restricted to people in elite professional jobs. In fact, the work of anthropologist David Graeber shows the opposite, that you have a lot of elite professionals who are working what they call bullshit jobs, where the job doesn't really have any intrinsic meaning, and it's just a kind of, it's just a sort of middle management layer that's been put there for some structural reason, and everyone in those positions is just sort of wondering, what am I doing? This job, like, even if the job didn't exist, it would make no difference to this organization. So you can have a sense of vocation in that sort of environment. So I think it is important for people to ask that question about what am I called to, and that sense of purpose.
I read in your article in Comment magazine about resisting a culture of incoherence and thought your description of mercenaries was fascinating. I know this is a different area of research, but is there any overlap with this work on beauty? Or can you say more about living moral, coherent lives?
Yeah, I mean, so the overlap, I suppose, would be is the mercenaries are sort of, it's a self-described term that corporate professionals I talk to would use. And they were talking about really this idea that work is, for them, they would say it's not a vocation. It's really a means to an end. It's a necessary evil. I do this because, I need to make money. My vocation is my family. And so I need a job, and therefore I'm just going to do this for money. I don't think that's a healthy way to live. Maybe it's important to do in the short term. I don't want to undermine that. Sometimes you just need to get a job for money. That's fine. But then to try to find ways in which that work can be meaningful and you can find some intrinsic satisfaction is important. Particularly if you want to live a more coherent life. Maybe it may just be that I'm in this job to learn some skills that I will apply elsewhere, or to maybe it's just simply I'm a presence in this environment that's going to bring some light to people, even if the tasks I do aren't really personally that satisfying, right? But I think some way to find that you as a protagonist have something of value to contribute to an environment is important, and that was something that I saw the people I interviewed just didn't have that, and they were really kind of swept up by because the danger then is you internalize the logics of that environment, and so everybody's really competing for the very few raises that are available and trying to suck up to their boss and stab this one in the back, etc. Like the challenge is like, how do you, if that's the environment you're in, how do you survive that? So part of it, I think, maybe to try to see if there's something intrinsically satisfying. And so I think doing intrinsically satisfying work is important for moral coherence. But there's also a question of maturity. I mean, you don't start being perfectly baked on day one. It's going to take you time to figure things out, and you're going to make mistakes, and you learn from your mistakes. I think it's important to be honest with ourselves and assess how we're doing. And one of the things I argued in that piece, it's so important to have friends that we can talk to, who we could be honest with, who could keep us accountable to our best selves, and perhaps help reveal to us what it is that we do find beautiful when we don't really see beauty. Maybe we need help.
Great. You spoke about the power of beauty to bring people together and create a sense of community. Are there any concrete examples that you've been looking at your research that have created a sense of community where it hasn't existed before?
That's a great question. I don't know. I think it's hard to say. I mean, it's happening in, with the scientists I'm talking to in their labs and so on, but I don't know if it didn't exist before. I mean, I suppose at some point there was no lab, right? I mean, I work with a team of a lot of students and other collaborators, and so we are trying to find beauty in the work of scientists, and that brings us joy, and it does sort of transform as we share with each other what we're finding, something about the nature of the work we're doing. I like the idea. I really would. One of the things I hope to do, I aspire to do with this platform, Beauty at Work, is to actually try to create some sort of community where people could somehow come together around beauty. I don't know what that looks like. If you have ideas, any of you listening, let me know, because I'd love to do that. I'd love to host or facilitate something where this could be the locus of a community. How could this be useful for you, or worthwhile for you, supportive for you? If there's a way that I can help make that happen, I'd be happy to. But yeah, I currently haven't seen much else outside my own team.
So as we begin to wrap up, where is it you hope to take this Beauty at Work?
This is really the very beginnings of this project. I mean, I only just started this year, and I feel like I just have a lot to learn, and I'm really exploring just a lot of different domains and talking to very different people. And I have interviews coming up with like I said, chefs and lawyers, looking at, is there beauty in the law? Can their written law be beautiful? Apparently, yes, according to the next person whose video I'm going to post, actually. So I'm learning a lot has been just super exciting and fascinating for me. like I said, I really would like to do something more than tell stories. If there's any way I can use this work in a way that benefits people, that can create a sense of community, that can be helpful for people supporting each other or finding new value or meaning or sense of purpose, or even cultivating virtue in their lives, I would be glad if this work could be useful. So I'm open to ideas, but at the moment it's just more exploration down this road. We're hosting some dinners. We have one coming up on beauty and business in a couple of weeks, and there may be more, that are more domain specific.
Great. One final question. If your life were a book, what would the title be?
Oh man, dazed and confused. I don't know. I really don't know. I maybe for now, maybe searching for beauty. I don't know. Like that seems to be that is the more I've done this work, the more I look at my own life and see a lot of threads where a lot of what I've been doing has been really led by a pursuit of beauty, including even my conversion. I'm a convert to Catholicism, from 25 years ago, and I think beauty played a big role in that process too. So yeah, maybe it would be something like that.
Great. And with that, I just want to thank you for spending the hour with us over
Well,
lunch.
thank you.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it was great to hear more about your work and all that you're doing. So thank you very much.
Thank you. My pleasure.
And so for everybody who joined us, next month on November 7th, we have a conversation on kindness, compassion, and medicine. So thank you all.